Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
This meeting is being recorded.
Yeah, thank you. Yogena chittasya padena vacham malam sharirasya ja vaidikena yopakurutam pravaram muninam patanjalim pranjaliranatosmi stuvai patanjalim vyasam shankaram chamitrayam kartrusutrasya bhashyasya pramadvivaranasya cha. So we are discussing the sadhana pada, which includes one of the most important topics in the entire philosophy and psychology of yoga. It's called Ashtanga Yoga, which opens with the 29th sutra. In some versions, which may have 196 sutras altogether, it could be 30th. So anyway, so we will just give a background of what we have been discussing during the last 2-3 sessions. We are discussing dukkha chadurvyuha, that is the quadrangle in yoga psychology. The idea is taken from Indian School of Medicine, Ayurveda, where they discuss the problem of the disease, the cause for it, and then the way to get out of it, and the medicine. Like that, in yoga psychology also, this is the dukkha chadurvyuha, this quadrangle of dukkha. Dukkha, again, I must remind my friends that dukkha doesn't really imply what it means in the dictionary. In the dictionary, the word dukkha could be translated into grief, sorrow, and so on. Though that is the standard translation into English, but in Buddhism and also in yoga, it actually implies a feeling of imperfection, incompleteness that we normally experience. In spite of everything going on fine for us in material life, still if you feel a kind of imperfection or incompleteness, which prompts us to look for something transcendental, some higher transcendental value, that state of mind is called dukkha in both in yoga psychology and also in the fundamental teachings of Buddhism. It's called the Four Noble Truths. So the first one is heyam. Heya means the possibility of sorrow or incompleteness in future should be eradicated. When we take to yoga, what we are trying to do, we are actually equipping our mind with some spiritual armor plate so that we will be able to live in this world happily, even if there are difficulties and problems, we will be able to handle those problems. That ability is the goal of yoga. Okay, now that's one. And then heya hetu. What is the cause of this sorrow? Again, I have to use the English word which is being used in standard translations. What is the cause for this dukkha? So, drashtra drisyayoho samyogo heya hetuhu. That means purusha and prakriti, the drashta and the drishya, the experiencer and the experienced, the subject and object. When we interpret ourselves in terms of what we are experiencing at the empirical level, then we feel this incompleteness. Then we feel a difficulty. When we interpret ourselves to be the experiencer, the one who goes through all these different multiple experiences, then we are actually lowering our true identity. That causes dukkha. And hanam means removal of the cause, abhava samyoga, abhava hanam. That drishehe kaivalyam. The Yoga Sutra will tell you later on. That is, removal of ignorance, removal of the misunderstanding, removal of the wrong or false identification. That is hanam. Hanopaya means the method, the way, the means for removing this false identification. That is, technically it is called in the Yoga Sutra Vivekakhyadi Aviplava Hanopaya, which means that Yoga Sutra will tell you later, when we practice Yoga Anushtana, Ashtanga Yoga, what happens? These mental impurities will be destroyed. So, Yoga Anushtana Asuddhikshayi. When we practice yoga, Yama, Niyama, Asana, Pranayama, Pratyahara, Dharana, Dhyana, Samadhi, Ashtanga Yoga, which we described in the 29th Sutra very soon, maybe today itself we will take up. When we practice that, what happens? All the mental impurities will be destroyed. Again, there is a problem of language here. Impurities here means conflicts, anxieties, worries. That's what actually we mean by the word mental impurity. So that should be understood. Mental impurity means conflicts, false identifications, anxieties, worries. It need not necessarily be of a pathological type. I mean, not something that's for a psychiatrist to analyze. It could be the normal situations when we associate ourselves to be involved in every single passing momentary worldly experiences, and when we become completely shackled, entangled in all these worldly sensory experiences, forgetting our higher transcendental identity, spiritual identity. Well, that is Ashuddhi in Sanskrit, means mental impurity. Asuddhikshaye sadi is a Sanskrit grammatical term. Asuddhikshaye sadi means it is sadi saptami, is a peculiar construction. So, Asuddhikshaye avivekakyadehe jnanadipti. What happens? The means for removal of this avidya or ignorance of this impurity, by what? Vivekakhyadi. Vivekakhyadi means higher spiritual insight. So these are certain terms used in yoga psychology which can only be approximately translated into other languages. So we need to keep in mind actual implication of these technical terms. Otherwise, if we just go by the literal translation, we may not often understand the true implication. So that means, now we'll come to this subject again. 19th Sutra we have been discussing, which I won't go further, but there is an important aspect to remember with regard to 19th Sutra, which we already discussed. That is Vishesha Lingamatram Alingam. This is a very famous sutra, which actually brings out some of the deeper aspects of human personality. So you find these terms used, Vishesham, diversified, which means 5 elements. That is matter, air principle, fire principle, space, water principle. All these are called 5 elements. And then mind plus the entire outer personality. Second, that is more important, Avishesha. Avishesha here includes the subtle aspects of the 5 elements. It's called tanmatras and our identity. Now, to understand this, I shall try to explain. What is our personality? Very often it's difficult to understand to actually understand what tanmatra, that's a word used in any scripture. Tanmatra is the subtle causal dimension of the five elements. Let us say our outer behavior, our actions, the words we speak, the physical deeds that we engage in, which all involve visible permutations and combinations of the five elements. What are the subtle dimension? Well, if you go, let us say, if you go to a place and the place has got certain specific characteristics. Let us say you go to a holy place. Devout Christians going to the Holy Land, Jerusalem, or maybe Buddhists going to Bodh Gaya, Hindus going to, let's say, Varanasi, or Jewish people going to Jerusalem, again, the holy place, Palestine, whatever it is. Or if you go to any holy place, maybe a place associated with holy men, holy women. You know, there are two ways of understanding how tanmatras, subtle elements work here. If you are a spiritually inclined person, you feel an elevation, a mental, psychological joy, fulfillment. You feel elated, great joy, a blessedness. When you go to a holy place, a holy place of pilgrimage of the religious tradition you belong to. So when you go there, your mind is connecting with that place, actually. Our mind, it's not the physical mind. The tanmatras are coming in contact with the tanmatras which are already present there. That's why we feel a kind of strange joy. So also, if you go to a different kind of place, the opposite type, you feel a disturbance. Because there is a conflict between your tanmatras, called what we normally call aura, so to speak. This idea has been sometimes pushed to extreme limits by Edgar Cayce in his books, which are perhaps not taken very seriously in our times, but there was a time when it was a big sensation. But he pushed it too hard, often to ridiculous lengths. So what happened, he somehow lost his ground. Anyway, I'm not going to those details. Many mansions, if you read the seminars interpretation, you find it pushed too far. But anyway, but it's a fact that when we go to some holy place, if we believe in the sacredness and sanctity of the place, we feel a kind of inner joy. That because that place is full of these tanmatras. That place has been enriched by great devotees, or pious people who may have contemplated, who may have read holy books. So the place has got association with many holy men and holy women. So when you go there, you feel great joy. And also, if an ordinary spiritual seeker, when he or she goes to a different kind of place, which is not so very holy, we may, let's say, crematoriums, burial grounds, places associated with, again, some violent deeds, violent experiences, So, again, there are negative tanmatras prevailing there. They disturb our mind. So we feel like going away from there. Another place, we feel like staying there. So also human beings. There are people in whose presence we feel a strange but very powerful feeling. Let me be somewhere else. A strong desire to be elsewhere gets when the company of certain people whose ideas normally create conflicts in our mind. We don't want to be there. We don't want to be in contact with such persons. And there are certain people whose association you may enjoy. So there is this mutual connection between samskaras. So that is what is called avishesha in this context. Well, that's why, of course, this has something to do with the human samskaras actually. People say that you should not, when you are a spiritual seeker, especially you are a beginner in spiritual life, you should make sure that you associate only with people whose association will enrich our own spiritual samskaras. Otherwise, we may feel disturbed. So there is a sloka frequently quoted in some yoga scriptures. It is very interesting. Prakshalanadhi pangasya durat asparshanam varam. It's a very powerful statement, very brief. Prakshalanadhi pangasya durat asparshanam varam. Suppose you're walking the street, there's a pool of dirty water, filth and mud. You don't want to walk through that because you have to wash your feet then. Or you may have to wash your shoes when you walk in a dirty place full of mud and dirt. But suppose you say, no, I will walk through the place, then I will wash my feet. That's not a sign of wisdom or intelligence. If you are an intelligent person, you would rather take a detour and avoid that dirty place. You don't want your feet to be dirty and then wash again. That's the real meaning. Prakshalanahi pangasya durad asparsanam. It's far better to see from a distance and not go near a dirty place rather than walking through the dirty place and then washing your feet. That is the strength of this statement. It is quoted in some very, very interesting interpretations of this scripture, in this context of the sutra. The third one mentioned in this 19th sutra is Lingamatram, which means cosmic intelligence or Mahat Tattvam. And D, Alingam. Alingam is Prakriti, which is already discussed. So, the 19th sutra is important because it actually gives a clue to human personality. Behind this visible, tangible, physical mechanism, mind we don't see, but behind this visible physical entity, there is an invisible real personality, and that personality is composed of that person's thoughts, his samskaras, his impressions, which are the result of his lifestyle, his actions. That's why certain people who are engaged in doing good things, great things, spiritually inclined people in their company, other spiritual seekers feel a great joy because there is a mutual connection. That's the idea behind. That is the relevance of this very important sutra, 19th sutra. Now we'll go to 20th sutra. That's a very brief sutra, but actually it has got an important relevance because the 20th sutra, 20th and 21st sutra, in a way describes, it relates to purusha. It's directly linked to some of the Sankhya, some of the verses in the Sankhya Karika. Sankhya Karika is the fundamental text for Sankhya philosophy. It was written by Ishvara Krishna sometime, they say maybe around 6th century AD. So that's a fundamental text of Sankhya philosophy. Sometimes it's called, in Western philosophical interpretations, it's called Indian concept of Indian evolutionism or evolutionary theory. Not biological evolution, but evolution as understood in the realm of philosophy. So the 20th sutra is Drashta Drissimatra Suddhobi Pratyayanu Pasya. What the sutra says is, this purusha is awareness. It is pure. And he witnesses all the modifications of empirical world. So that is our true identity. We are not involved, we are the witness. To reach that state of awareness is the purpose of yoga. I mean, to de-identify ourselves from involvement in material things. Now, in this context, frequently the traditional interpreters, they refer to one verse from the Sankhya Karika. It's called 17th verse. The verse is, those of you who can read the text later, the 17th verse of Sankhya Karika. Sanghada pararthatvad trigunadi vibedriyad adhishthanad purusha asti bhoktru bhavanat kaivalyartha pravuttescha. It's a very famous verse in the Sankhya Karika, because it gives 5 arguments in the form of a syllogism. Very, very similar, but somewhat more elaborate to the syllogisms that you find in Aristotle, in the Greek classical thinkers. So, that particular verse is this verse 17, that is Sankhata Pararthatvad Trigunadi Vipetriyad Adhishthanat Purusha Asti, means Purusha exists. Bhoktra Bhava Kaivalyartha Pravurtescha. What it says is simple. The entire Prakriti, this empirical, phenomenal universe consisting of 23 avenues like Mahatattva Ahangara, then mind with different aspects of Antakarna, internal organs, intellect, and then 5 senses of perception, 5 senses of action, then the tanmatras and the 5 elements which constitute the empirical universe. All these actually, these aggregates, where they all exist. So if there is such a thing, suppose there is a chair, and a chair or a table, in fact that is used in the traditional syllogism. Suppose you have got an elaborate furniture. With the furniture, it took long time for the carpenter to make it. He used many tools and many parts put together to form a congregate entity. Then that particular congregate entity should have a purpose. What's the purpose? To sit down. That's the purpose of a chair. A table, all the whole table furniture, it's made. It's not for itself. Not somebody else to sit and write, putting a book right there. Suppose I think of a car. What is a car for? This whole complex aggregate, it is meant for somebody to sit and drive. So, if there is an aggregate, there should be somebody else distinct from that aggregate for whom this aggregate entity is created. So that's a syllogism, the logical formulation they use to establish the idea that there is such a thing as purusha. The syllogism continues, but I won't burden the listeners with these syllogisms any longer. But this first one is the purusha exists because the aggregate is for another sake. That is sanghadasya pararthatva. Sanghada means an aggregate. Well, suppose you make a bread omelette and you put all these things together. If you do that, certainly it is not meant for the bread. It is not meant for the individual ingredients which constitute the bread omelette. Whatever, I don't eat it, but maybe my description of the edible material may not be exactly accurate because I don't eat it. But I'm giving an example in my own mind. Then that particular entity should be for somebody else to eat, not for itself. Like that, an aggregate is for another sake. That is the one logic. So there should be purusha. This prakriti is there, and all the evolutes and the universe, this evolution, all this is happening. There should be something which is not part of this, for which the entire elaborate thing is happening. If you are preparing a stage for making a stage ready, it should be for somebody to come and play a drama there. not for itself, not just for the sake of stage itself. The aggregate is not for its sake. The aggregate is for somebody else, something which is distinct from the aggregate. That's a logic. And the second point is the absence of three gunas and other properties. So these aggregate the Prakriti and the entire evolutes together, constituting the entire universe, is consists of three gunas. But purusha is beyond that. So there should be something distinct from Prakriti. Third one is, in fact, that is why in Trigunadi Vibirriyad. The third argument is there must be a controller. There will be somebody else, something distinct from all this, which is controlling it. If there is a house, there should be somebody staying in that house. The house cannot exist by itself. There should be somebody to whom the house belongs, who is staying there. So that is why, adhishthanat. That is the third argument. Then fourth one is bhoktrbhavat. That means there will be somebody who is an experiencer. I give this example. If you are cooking something, there may be somebody for whom that cooked thing is meant for him to eat or for her to eat. The cooked food is not made for the sake of cooked food, but it is meant to be eaten by somebody else. This is the side. You find this kind of syllogism applied in so many different ways in different systems of Indian philosophy. Shankaracharya's works are full of that. Again and again, dozens of syllogisms. And the fifth one is of the tendency, that is kaivalyartha pravurtescha. And all these different evolutes of Prakriti, they are not free. So if they are not free, there is always a possibility that they are working towards final liberation or beatitude, so to speak. These are the syllogisms, different arguments used by the dialectical interpreters of Yoga Sutras, especially while explaining the 20th Sutra. So I just gave you a background of this. It's a very interesting subject. Those who are interested can ask questions later and we'll be happy to take it further. And then we will go to the 21st Sutra, Tadartham eva drishyasi atma. The second related. Here, that is, it is for that seer that this, that means it is for the drashta, for the witness, the experiencer, the seer, that the experienced or the seen objects exist. If the subject, it is for the subject to witness that the object exists. So, according to Vyasa, the very existence of Prakriti has relevance only so long as it serves the purpose of purusha. So, that's the idea behind. So, this is a fundamental principle in Sankhya Karika. 22nd is Kudartham pradi nashtam api anashtam tad sadharanatvad. That's the meaning here. The meaning of this is simple. What happens to Prakriti after spiritual illumination? Now, what happens to a spiritual seeker who practices yoga, who realizes his purusha identity, and who is able to look at everything that happens around him as a witness, detaching himself from involvement or entanglement? Then what about this Prakriti? What happens? The Prakriti is lost to him. So I shall try to explain this. Suppose a person practices yoga, Ashtanga yoga, reaches Samadhi, Viveka Khyadi is sometimes called, or Nirvikalpa, this Asamprajnata Samadhi, Viveka Khyadi, and he gets completely free from this entanglement in this empirical universe. Such a person, in actual practice, he will show his spiritual experience in his everyday activities, and it will express in his everyday life, every moment. So how do we know such a person? He won't remain there inert. He may be active. If he is working in the Intel as an IT specialist, he will not resign the job and go to a forest. He may continue working in the company. If he is CEO, he will continue working. He doesn't have to leave the Silicon Valley and go somewhere else because he has reached Viveka Khyadi. Not at all. What happens is, he will be able to experience a unique kind of inner fulfillment, inner joy, inner contentment. And then, in his everyday activities, he will display a unique kind of wisdom. We may call it, in my talks, when I interpret this, I use the word a kind of spiritual common sense. It is common sense, but not the common sense that normally you learn by studying behavioral psychology or by going through this business management training where they teach you to practice self-restraint while talking to negotiating. The negotiating table, diplomat is taught all these things. It's not that kind of common sense. It is not that kind of labored, enforced self-restraint. Such a person will, in his inner life, he will experience a kind of contentment. And that contentment will express as a kind of common sense, a maturity, a moderation, a kind of being adult, mature in living in this world. When things go very well, they won't be elated, they won't be overjoyed. When there's a problem, they won't be devastated. That kind of inner balance, spiritual common sense, is what really happens to a person who advances in yoga life. This is the real meaning. This is the sign of Viveka Khyadi. Now, when we go to the text, when I interpret, I'm going to explain this later in the light of Vajaspati, in the light of Vijnana Bhikshu, Vyasa and others. The technical language in which these ideas are put in Sanskrit may not be make it very obvious what it implies. What it means is, it gives us a kind of maturity, wisdom, an ability to handle life in a mature manner. That's the idea behind. Well, what happens? Prakriti, so far as he is concerned, he is not affected by it. So it is lost to him. That's the meaning of the sutra. Kudartham, because for him the purpose of his life is being fulfilled. What's the purpose? Purpose is to achieve this spiritual wisdom. It's called prajna, which we are going to discuss in the coming sutras. An inner illumination, inner insight. You feel a kind of kudartha. I mean, whatever you have been trying to achieve, that you have already achieved. Now that kind of, it's called the kudartham prati, nashtamapi. So far as the person who has reached that level of contentment is concerned, prakriti is gone. Material world as a threatening preposition doesn't exist for him. Normally, the world disturbs us. When there is a problem, we are disturbed. Everything is going on fine. When everything is going on well, we are overjoyed. So the world is affecting us. The world is influencing us. But a man of spiritual wisdom will be totally free from this being affected by the world or momentary experiences in the world. That's why Kudartham Prati Nashtam Api Anashtam Tada Anyasadharanatva. But for as others are concerned, Prakriti is there. All these problems are there. They have to struggle themselves. I told you earlier that where Yoga Sutra believes in Aneka Purushavada. Each individual person has to work his own way, start on his own journey to spiritual illumination. That's the idea behind. Then the 23rd Sutra, it is Swami Shaktiyoho Sarupopalabdhihetuhu Samyogaha. So, what is actually the cause of the problem? Association is the means of knowing the true nature of the powers of the owned and the knower. That's the idea behind, a person who understand this sutra. I mean, the present sutra actually says that it is because of some yoga that the Surupa Vulabdhi, the realization of the true nature of the power of Shakti is seen, and the true nature of Shakti is the power of seer takes place. So what happens, Purusha Prakriti Samyoga, Drashtra Drishya Samyoga. Because of this, what happens is nature, Prakriti, and all its avenues and experiences are experienced in our life. This idea behind. Of course, this is an elaborate sutra, but we will move on to the next sutra, which are important. Tasya hetuhu avidya. So this samyoga, this association, is caused by avidya. Avidya is state of ignorance of our true nature, by which ignorance, the ignorance that causes us to forget our own true spiritual identity. As a result of this forgetfulness of our own true spiritual identity with Purusha, we get entangled, we identify ourselves with every momentary experience at the sensory level. Tadabhava samyoga bhavo hanam tadrishye kaivalyam. Now what is liberation? The absence of this avidya, the absence of this ignorance or wrong understanding leads to cessation of the association. So what happens, when avidya is gone, what happens? Prakriti, Purusha, Samyoga comes to an end. The association with Prakriti and Purusha comes to an end. Then every spiritual seeker will identify his true nature with Purusha. That's the idea behind. Vyasa says avidya is vipariya jnana vasana ityartha. So that's an expression of avidya, Vyasa says. This may help us to understand how avidya works. Vipariya jnana vasana. What does it mean? A natural inclination to misunderstanding things. That is Vipariya Jnana Vasana. How this functions. So avidya or ignorance, as we understand here, cannot be really understood verbally. But in our life, we can always experience it. Suppose in our mind, because of previous samskaras, we have a natural attraction for things which are actually not good for us. Or we have a tendency to associate ourselves with what we actually are not. We are in reality Purusha itself. But we don't identify ourselves with Purusha. We identify ourselves with Prakriti. That is Vipariya Jnana Vasana. Vasana is natural tendency of the mind to do certain things or to act in certain ways, mostly propelled by previous samskaras or our own mental our impressions or characteristics. When that tendency is a tendency to associate in the wrong way, then it becomes Vipariya Jnana Vasana. Then we understand it is avidya that is operating behind this. So that's the real implication of Vyasa's famous statement. He says, avidya is, according to Vyasa, Vipariya Jnana Vasana ityartha. Means latent subconscious impressions which make us act and do things in a certain manner. If you take a strong decision intellectually, I will not act in this manner. I will not do this. I will do something else. We may take a strong decision. The mind actually is full of vasanas, vipariya jnana vasana. Then what happens? Mind actually prompts us to act in a way that is not really good for us. It's an example of vipariya jnana vasana. So when we use the word avidya and when we use the English translation, we may not really make a clear understanding. It may not be very clear to us. But when we understand how it actually operates in our life, it becomes clear. I give this example frequently. There is always a conflict between what we actually want to do and what our mind, what our tendencies will permit us to do. Whatever we want to do, our tendencies, our impressions, our mind won't permit us to do. This is a conflict. If we can do what we want to do, many of the problems in the world can be avoided. Of course, Yoga Sutra already gave a solution to this problem. In the first sutra, that is when he explained the Kriya Yoga, that is Tapaswadhyaya Ishara Pranidhanani Kriya Yoga, the first sutra of Sadhana Pada, where it stated that if we practice, let's say, good association with people, if we take up some good activity without any selfish motive, with some noble motive, some higher motive, and if we feed our mind with good ideas, good impressions by reading books, by associating with people whose association will give us holy vibrations, or visit places full of holy vibrations, then what happens, slowly the way our mind reacts will change. Our mind also evolves. Our mind will become more willing to cooperate with us when we want to do something good. If I want to meditate, mind won't permit, because mind is not ready to cooperate with you. Mind is not your friend then. So mind will not know, I won't allow you to meditate. So conflicts. On the other hand, well, don't force the mind. No, I shall meditate for 2 hours. It can lead to headache. It can lead to delusions. It can lead to a set of multiple problems with Patanjali. You explains under the umbrella term Bhranti Darsana. It could be hallucinations, it could be delusions, false thoughts and false visions. All this can happen. On the other hand, instead of forcing the mind, no, I shall meditate, instead of that, no, I cannot meditate, I am restless, but I have plenty of energy. So let me do something noble. I did the noble need not necessarily for others good. You can read some good book, you can go on a pilgrimage, you can spend longer time in doing something creative. If possible, if you can, we can help another person, karma yoga, devotional practices. Those who believe in God may find it easier to do that. Some devotional practices, singing holy songs, which actually create a spiritual vibration in our mind and gives us a kind of contentment. Those activities will slowly turn the mind towards a more friendly composure. Then mind will slowly cooperate with us when we want to meditate. So what is happening here is, slowly mind is becoming our friend. So this is the implication of this particular sutra. That is Tadabhava Samyoga Bhava Khanam Tadvishri Kaivalya. The 26th sutra is Vivekakhyadhi Aviplava Hanopayaka. The means for eradication of this ignorance is Vivekakhyadi, that is unbroken wisdom. Unbroken wisdom. You may find a word used in traditional translations, unbroken discrimination. That word has got sometimes wrong connotations in social and political context. So what it actually means is this: we feel a kind of inner contentment, inner satisfaction, a kind of inner joy. Well, I have done what I should have done. Out of that, we feel a kind of healing effect, and we feel a kind of inner joy, a spiritual common sense. That's what happens. And if that happens, we know we are on the right track. And then we have 27th Sutra, Tasya Saptadha Pranta Bhumihi Prajna. I shall try to explain this later, because this sutra requires a better understanding of the entire psychology of yoga practices, which actually comes only later sutras. This particular sutra, it explains how this insight, that is this viveka khyati, higher spiritual insight, you may call it higher spiritual wisdom, how this comes and how it slowly progresses in 7 different stages. So that particular sutra we will take up later, because it is analyzed from 2 angles. One is the first 4 stages, the other is the later 3 stages. You can Karya Mukti and Chitta Vimukti. So that particular sutra we will not take up later. We may discuss this after Ashtanga Yoga is completed, that is after the 29th sutra is completed. So please remember, you can remind me if I forget, you're most welcome to remind me. 27th sutra is very important. What it says is this higher spiritual insight slowly is attained after going through 7 stages. These 7 stages are divided into 2 categories. The first 4 stages, first the suffering that is to be eradicated as being properly understood by me, by the person. Secondly, that cause of suffering slowly decreases. Third, the eradication is now happening and the progress is visibly felt. And the fourth one is a strong means for eradicating this ignorance as being cultivated. Fifth one is our intellect has been fulfilled. Our intellect has become more mature. It is now convinced of its higher spiritual purpose. Sixth one is the 3 gunas become slowly disintegrated, because we are able to detach ourselves from the turbulence of 3 gunas. And the 7th stage is at this stage we identify ourselves with the purusha. So this we will take up after the 29th sutra is completed. Now we will come to 29th sutra. Before that, another one is the Yoganga Anushthanat Asuddhikshaye Avivekakhyadeke Jnanadiptihi. It says nothing but this: what happens when you practice yoga anusthana, how to practice yoga anusthana. This also will take up later. Now 29th sutra. The yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhiho, ashto angani. These are the 8 disciplines mentioned. Yama, niyama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. Yama means self-restraint. Niyama means certain observances. Asana is a physical posture. Please remember, it has nothing at all to do with different yoga postures. Asana here is an umbrella term. It actually implies any kind of yoga postures which are explained in the Hatha Yoga Pratipika, Gheranta Samhita and Shiva Samhita. These 3 important books which describe very elaborately different yoga postures. Those yoga postures are meant to help us to sit for a long time without disturbance and with a sense of total relaxation. and joy. That is why sthira sukham asanam. So that's the meaning of asana. This asana, it may be okay if we conclude, according to historians, that these three important works which describe yoga postures have been written in later centuries, long after Patanjali Yoga Sutra became well known. They must have been written by great monks, scholars, or ascetics who must have studied Patanjali Yoga Sutras. So they may have codified different physical postures which they may have practiced and perfected so that they can sit for a long time without feeling any strain, so that the body will not remind them of its entity. If the body reminds us, we have not achieved asana siddhi, means attaining the ability to sit in the right posture. A person, a spiritual practitioner, should be able to sit, and then he should be able to transcend his body awareness. For that, he needs a strong body, because a weak body, a sick body will drag you towards itself. A healthy body will help you to transcend itself, because it will not remind you. So that is why yama, niyama, asana, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. The first stage is body, then senses, the mind, and slowly the higher faculties of the mind are disciplined, and dharana, dhyana, samadhi. This is the subject. So we will take up the other sutras after we have completed this particular 29th sutra. Most welcome. You can ask questions. Questions are always welcome, and it will be helpful to me to clarify points I may have forgotten during the discussion. Thank you.
Hari Om Swamiji.
Hari Om.
Yeah, so I had one question.
Yeah.
So this is from closer to the beginning of today's class, where you were talking about tanmatras, right?
Yeah.
And you were talking about the way I understood it is tanmatra is a kind of latent sanctity that lives in a being, in a place, in various physical manifestations. And you said that when someone goes to a temple, for instance, they feel, so there is a certain tanmatra, a certain aura, if you may, in that particular place, and then there is a certain tanmatra in the person, and then one feels that kind of connection. Now, does the tanmatra or the, I don't know if I can use the word aura, I don't know if it's correct, you tell me, but does the tanmatra of a certain place attract itself to everyone, like anyone who goes to a temple? Do they, will the tanmatra react on them in a positive manner, for instance? If not, what is it that causes tanmatra to attract itself to one another? Okay, what is it that makes a connection?
Yeah. Now first about tanmatras themselves. Tanmatras neutral, not always good, sometimes very bad also. It could happen. So tanmatras are vibrations that interact with our internal organs, our subtle personality. Actually, a person's invisible personality is composed of some tanmatras, which again are composed of karma, vasana, vritti, samskaras, different impressions, etc. Now, that is one thing. There are places which negative tanmatras, and there are places with positive, healthy tanmatras. The second part of the question, if an individual's mental structure is good, and if he is himself or she is herself a spiritual seeker, if that person goes to a temple or any holy place, a church or whatever may be, then that person will feel at home in that place, because there is a connection. He will be able to connect with that place. If that person is a highly exalted person, he'll be able to contribute and enrich that place by contributing his own healthy tanmatras. That's why pilgrim places are important, because it has been associated with great sages and saints who have gone there, meditated there, being associated with those places. So those places accumulate healthy vibrations, healthy tanmatras, healthy samskaras. So when we go there, and if we are also spiritual seekers, we feel we feel great joy, because our own healthy tanmatras are getting reinforced or enriched. People who visit these pilgrim centers slowly become devotees, more pious, because they start enjoying the association. If, on the other hand, people with wrong or negative tanmatras, if they visit a holy place, their presence will be affecting the holiness of that place. A holy place is not because God is living there. We should forget that idea. God is not living in a holy place. God is present everywhere. When we, in our own devotional disciplines, when we meditate, when we contemplate, when we think of higher values, then our mind slowly becomes pure, and then we feel the divine reality present in us. Similarly, in a holy place, when holy persons go and meditate and do spiritual disciplines, what happens? The place becomes holy. I can give an example. I won't mention. In India, there are some temples which are mentioned in the Rigveda Samhita, that is 3,000, 4,000 years. Actually, you cannot really walk. One person, you have to struggle for walking, because when the temple was originally constructed, maybe 4,000 years back, only one individual could go. There was no population. Now today, Indian cities are teeming with millions. So today, not only that, in addition to that, you can find all kinds of cattle, dogs, all lying in the streets. But people want to go there. They want to go there, they have to sit there and meditate. And they start waiting in the Kashi Vishwanath Mandir, which is very narrow streets, very risky to go. Big cattle and dogs will be in the streets. But people start lining up 2 o'clock. People coming from all over the world start lining up 2 o'clock, 1 o'clock. A few miles away, there are gigantic modern temples, like just huge marble structures, which can accommodate tens of thousands of people. Very clean, all vintage, everything wonderful. Nobody goes there except tourists go there. But who goes to these old structures? All people go there, because when you go there, you feel a difference. It is not just a matter of faith. There is an objective scientific proof on that. Because these places are being associated with holy persons for thousands of years. So the places accumulated strong, healthy spiritual vibrations. That's what happens. Or maybe if you see the streets of Jerusalem, you find old Jerusalem. In pictures you can see. So these places have a history that goes back thousands of years, when the population was very small. So those places were big enough for the small, tiny population who lived in those places thousands of years back. But nobody feels any great spiritual joy by visiting a huge structure full of marble, full of the latest architectural marvels. You may go and enjoy it, take photographs, and people go for film shooting also. But you don't feel any spiritual vibration in those huge, gigantic structures. So what's it? Why? The spiritual vibration. Because these places have been accumulating spiritual vibrations. We call tanmatras for thousands of years. This is applicable to all religious traditions, all spiritual traditions, everywhere in this world, this idea. So if you are already a spiritual seeker, then you feel your own spiritual vibrations further reinforced or strengthened or enriched when you visit a holy place, because you get benefited. On the other hand, if a very bad person goes to a holy place, depending upon the place and his own makeup, there will be some improvement in his condition. But if he goes to an ordinary place, it could be the other way around. A place associated with people whose vibrations, tanmatras, are negative, that place also gets, it also accumulates negative samskaras, negative vibrations. So you feel disturbed there. If you are a spiritual seeker, you feel disturbed because there is a mismatch, disconnect between the two. So that's why it's called Abhishesha in the 19th Sutra. The sutra I took up because it says something very relevant about what we call associations. We talk about aura, we talk about the inner personality, whatever it is, nothing but tanmatras. That's how Patanjali, the Yoga Sutra teacher, calls it tanmatras, the subtle, invisible things. That's why when you can find many great men the world has seen, not very great to see physically, like a man like Gandhi, nothing very, nothing very impressive physically, but you are one of the greatest human beings. I give the example, maybe the great Lincoln himself, according to his own words, a great man, he invokes spiritual vibrations. Why? Because he reminds you of great ideas, noble ideas. We call spirituality. Spirituality is not going to a temple and praying to God. Spirituality is nobility, compassion, some higher ideals that we express and practice in our life. You can find many such great men and women in the history of the world who are not very remarkable, but then physically, but they were great personalities, very charming personalities, very attractive personalities, because they, by the presence, they could influence, they could inspire whole civilizations, nations, you find. So that's because that tanmatra. So tanmatras, actually the invisible, were very powerfully and intimately felt real impressions that no one can deny. Though we cannot scientifically prove it, but we can experience it. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Yeah, no, sir.
Sutra 22, Kritartham Pratinashtam.
Yeah, oh yeah.
Says the Prakriti is lost for that purusha.
Yeah.
Does that mean the body disintegrates for that?
No. It doesn't mean body disintegrates. The body doesn't pull him down towards itself. He will, as I mentioned, he will continue living in this world. He will do his normal duties, but he will, in his mind, he will have a sense of his identity that goes beyond this empirical identity or empirical associations. And the only proof that we can see is such persons, enlightened persons, will not be shaken by a tragedy and will not be overjoyed when something wonderful happens to that person. So that ability to retain his posture, his inner balance, in a different way. It's not the result of training. See, a well-trained diplomat will be suffering from all kinds of problems, but he will laugh and smile because that's part of a job. That is true in many other professions, which I don't want to name, you misunderstand. Because that's part of training. But here, there is an inherent serenity, calmness, and a sense of moderation that you can feel when a person becomes Kudartha. That means what Artha means, what he is aspiring for. Krida means that he has attained. So he has attained something, and along with that attainment, he has also realized that there is nothing higher to aspire for. That feeling comes only when you attain something spiritual, when you experience a spiritual contentment. Then you feel this inner contentment, and you feel there is nothing higher that I should look for. This is itself self-complete. That state in Sanskrit is called Kudartha. Means a state of mind when you feel you have attained that, after attaining which there is nothing more to be attained. That brings the deep sense of inner contentment.
A related question,
Yeah.
Maharaj, is how does the purusha associate with only small part of the prakriti instead of?
Oh yes, every individual has is purusha. So it is, purushas are as many as there are human beings. Purushas are not just one. There are as many purushas as there are human beings. Maybe if we want to understand what purusha is, as I gave the 5 arguments from the Sankhya Karika, behind and beyond this aggregate, the physical aggregate, the mental and physical aggregate that we all have, there is something distinct, which is the real, my true nature, which is eternal. The aggregate is not eternal. It's changing. Every moment, body is changing. Mind also changes. Intellect also is wavering. So, behind this wavering and changing phenomena, there is an unchanging eternal reality. So, that identity, that true identity that is behind all of us, that is what is called purusha. So that purusha is distinct for every individual person. When you attain that experience, so far as you are concerned, the world doesn't shock you any longer. The world doesn't disturb you any longer. You can find this happening not only in the yoga psychology, but also in the psychology of devotion. Great mystics. If you look at the life of the great mystics, European mystics, Middle Ages, I think they didn't have a good time. None of them actually. Many of them were persecuted. Many of them got only post-mortem recognition. Most of them. They had a very hard time when they were living. And maybe within about 250 years, they will be canonized. But they didn't have a good time when they were living in this world. But still they could withstand. Look at the life of... I often give the example of Saint Teresa of Avila. Well, there are equally great examples everywhere in this world. But Saint Teresa of Avila, because she wrote this elaborate Inner Castle, she wrote this elaborate autobiographical writings. She was trying to reform the convent to which she belonged. And she got help from St. Peter and some of them, and she often didn't get much support from many, but still she was a great example. On the one hand, she was a great devotee of God. On the other hand, she was also a great reformer of the convent movement. It's a grand example. But she was never shaken. Her faith was never shaken. So where should she get this strength? That's because she identified herself with something other than the physical aggregate. So she had this Kudartha pradi nashtam abhi anashtam. See, we should remember when we study Yoga Sutra, we should remember Yoga Sutra is actually placing a mirror in front of us, in front of every human being. So the most marvelous aspect of yoga psychology is when you study this and when you study the lives of great spiritual persons in any tradition, Not necessarily in religious tradition, but even Buddhists, they didn't believe in God, in fact. Great examples you can find in Buddhism. So they had this Kudartha state. It means a state of mind where the mind remains settled, deeply rooted in a kind of inner spiritual contentment. And how does it express itself? The feeling, well, I have attained something beyond which there is nothing more to attain. It could be in the form of, well, God will protect me. I explained this in the last session, Sharanagati, the 6 conditions of self-surrender. Now, this applied to all the great mystics. So that state is called Kudartha. So that person is concerned, the world no longer shocks, no longer disturbs, no longer creates problems for us. That is the point.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Namaskar, Maharaj.
Namaskar.
Can you hear me?
Yeah, please.
Yes.
Yeah, please.
This concept of holding the mirror up is so fundamental and yet seems so difficult for some to cross the threshold of seeing themselves that way. So what I was wondering about was the connection between a couple of concepts in the sutras that connects this idea of the union with the modality of the viveka khyati. So in other words, if the skills that are needed to close the gap are fundamental to closing the gap, then the gap can also be defined by the absence of those skills.
Yeah. So when we discuss this Ashtanga Yoga, we will be discussing this, especially.
Yes, you did say that. You said that you would get to the heart of the matter from Sutra 29 later on.
Yeah.
But I was thinking that this idea of the union of the purusha and the prakriti were so fundamental to the viveka.
Yeah.
And so when that sutra comes along and points to what's going to happen later on, it seems like a very natural progression.
Yeah, very natural. Very natural.
Yeah.
Because that's, in fact, Viveka Khyati is frequently translated as an insight. That's a very, very, very accurate as far as any translation can go, Viveka Khyati. When we get an insight into the nature of reality that we are, then that insight cannot really be explained in words. So Viveka Khyati is a very good approximation to denote, to describe something which cannot really be described. So right from dharana onwards, that is the 6th, 7th and 8th, dharana, dhyana and samadhi. It's called samyama. These 3 together they go together. And when we reach a samadhi state, what really happens is, then it's often described as somebody who wakes up. Suddenly there is a waking up happening. And once we wake up, then whatever we have experienced in dream are not worth bothering about. It's a gradual process. This waking up in the physical life is something very abrupt, that happens abruptly. But this waking up, spiritual awakening, happens as a result of this Viveka Khyati. It could have also happened, there are examples, it could also happen abruptly. you find this the transformation, sudden transformation that frequently happen to some of the great saints the world has seen. Sudden transformation. But it's not really sudden. They were going through certain experiences, and when we look at the whole thing from a superficial perspective, we may think it's a sudden awakening. But that person has been going through a lot of course, in Western context, you can St. Francis of Assisi or Augustine, all these are examples. St. Paul, the many in Indian tradition also you find innumerable persons, a greedy person, a stingy person, a cruel person. Suddenly, how can this cruel man become a saint? Then nothing wrong in being cruel, but really it doesn't happen that way. So there, Yoga Sutra will tell you, that person had already accumulated a lot of these tanmatras, samskaras in his or her previous life cycles. And then he had some desire yet to be fulfilled before he died. And when he was born, he wanted to be a rich person. And in that experience, there was the seed of his own transformation. He pushed his wealth and his greed to a limit where he hit the rock bottom. And when you hit the rock bottom, you hit the rock and suddenly there is a spring that comes alive, perennial water. But we don't remember what he had gone through in previous life cycles. It doesn't happen to everyone. Mostly people who are rich, they continue being rich and they continue living like rich persons till their death without any transformation in many cases. But there are rare examples. This is the pendulum turns the just opposite end. Complete transformation. The only way to explain this according to Yoga Sutra, Buddhism and Hinduism is that the person has been accumulating lot of healthy samskaras. But something had yet to be done. So, and this time he hit the rock bottom and took a hammer and hit the rock, and then suddenly the spring comes alive. That's what Sri Ramakrishna says. Sri Ramakrishna gives the example. Accidentally you're hitting the rock, and then you hit a rock, and suddenly it was broken, and the spring comes alive. It floods the whole well with water. So this is what really happens. But actually, there was water there. Somebody had deposited water. The previous life cycles, we have created samskaras, accumulated samskaras, which made the mind ready for, we prepared the mind ready for this quick and sudden transformation. That Vivekakhyati could happen. That also is under Vivekakhyati. So it's not everyone goes through this yama, asana, pranayama, pratyahara, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. This is a very scientific explanation. But those persons must have already reached the 7th level in previous life cycles. Then in this life, there was something else to be done. So immediately this sudden transformation happens. Sorry.
So Maharaj, if it may be best not to walk through the mud and clean our boots afterwards, but the muddy experience might be the catalyst for the transformation.
Could you repeat once more?
I was referring to the aphorism about the desire to avoid the mud.
Oh yeah.
But it's better to avoid the mud than to walk through the mud and clean your boots afterwards. But if we do find mud on our boots, let it be the source of our transformation. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's true. But then, our samskara should make the mind ready. I gave the example of teaching the Gita while discussing the Gita, There are persons who have done a lot of spiritual practices, but they die before realizing the highest spiritual truth. But they have some unfulfilled desires. They are reborn again. They will be born in a family or in a set of circumstances that would permit the person to fulfill the unfulfilled desire from previous life. And once that is done, the rock is broken, hit, and the spring arises. So there is still gradual evolution. But the point is, in some cases, we see only that part of the iceberg, only with this light that is seen above the waterline. But the huge part of the 90% of the iceberg is below the waterline. That is come from previous life cycles. So that should be taken into consideration. Once we take that into consideration, we find there is a gradual evolution that happens. Yeah.
Thank you, Maharaj.
Thank you. So thank you for this wonderful session and the questions especially. Om Shanti 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 Harihi Om Tat Sat Sri Ramakrishna Arpanamastu.
The recording has